Welcome in, everybody. We're going to give folks 30 seconds to join in, and then we'll get started. Okay, we are about 30 seconds past the top of the hour, so welcome again, everyone. We have a great webinar for you today and a great group of presenters. Just a few housekeeping notes to start off with. We are recording today's webinar. We'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you with a link to the recording and slides. You can also download the slides on the platform today by clicking on the PDF in the related content window. If there is time, we will have a question and answer period at the end. So please feel free to type in your questions at any time, and we will get to them at the end. Also, at the end of the webinar, please fill out the survey that will pop up on your screen automatically. We'd love to know what you thought of the webinar and how we can continue to improve the OmniGrowth series. So again, we have a great webinar for you. And to start, I'd like to send it over to Ann Zabowski for the introduction. Ann, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you to all of you for joining us. We're really excited for this next chapter of our OmniGrowth webinar series today, the long-anticipated launch of the category playbook. For over a year ago, Circana, firstmovr, and Profitero joined together, recognizing the need in the industry for a holistic way and a holistic approach to actually tackle omnichannel versus e-commerce and bricks and mortar in a silo. And we're super excited today to be able to launch the next chapter of that series and continue to help working with all of our clients to help drive and change the industry and embrace omni as the consumer has. So as we take a look and get started today, my name is Ann Zabowski, and I manage our digital shelf and e-commerce solutions today at Circana. I've been in the e-commerce and omnichannel space for over 16 years, both in a strategic consulting capacity as well as on the brand side, like many of you, working with retailers and agency, and now driving some of that change by connecting the data sets to help bring and level up e-commerce capabilities to the level that we expect in bricks and mortar. I'm joined today by Oskar Koziubski, the Chief Growth Officer and co-founder of firstmovr. Oskar, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hey, Ann, thanks for having me back. I've been in e-commerce almost 20 years, started in DTC, but then I was running e-commerce for Kimberly-Clark, Mondelez, and Kellogg. And now at firstmovr, we are actually accelerating e-commerce capability through a lot of the educational events that we have, as well as training, strategy, and we also have temporary workforce. But it's really great to be here, and this is an exciting piece of work that we've been working on it with you all together for the last few weeks.
Awesome. Thank you, Oskar. So without further ado, let's dive in today. So here's our agenda. We're going to spend most of the time taking you through the OmniGrowth category playbook, and we've chosen a category to take you through. We're going to bookend it with some quick context around the imperative to embrace the dynamics of the omnichannel consumer and marketplace, as well as some tips and tricks to help your company put it into action. So let's dive in. As we have known for quite some time, and thinking about the omnichannel consumer, the consumer went omni a long time ago, and 84% of shoppers today are omnichannel consumers, leveraging both online and in-store in order to build out their capabilities. As we take a look at the stat from Forrester, while we take a look at sales that are in e-commerce, that doesn't represent the full impact of online. And as you take a look, 70% of sales will be digitally influenced by 2027. And we've got to build out a playbook that takes that into account versus copying and pasting what we do for a bricks and mortar environment into online. We've got to build and design for both. As we think about the omnichannel landscape and who's winning in the marketplace today, At Circana, we put out our annual top brands growth across retailer. And as we take a look from general merchandise to retail food and beverage, as well as CPG, and you take a look at some of the brands that are growing the fastest in the marketplace and driving the most dollar growth. One of the things, as you take a look at the icon across the board, we've denoted brands that have a really strong presence in social media. Digital commerce from social media along down the line becomes a really important influencer in breaking through and driving an awareness and connecting with folks. And so as we take a look at even our examples today and the broader marketplace, we can see that social media and digital capabilities really are helping brands stand out and move beyond the general pace of growth to drive competitive advantage. As we take a look at the role of e-commerce, most people like to take a look at what is e-commerce share of omni sales. And at Circana, we put this out each year and continue to update it to track all of the categories from general merchandise to food and beverage and non-edible, and what their share is of e-commerce. And while general merchandise categories are way further ahead in terms of overall penetration, a lot of the consumables categories, we have almost 40% of their sales coming from e-commerce and continuing to grow. When Oscar and I first started in e-commerce, we were always met with the 1% problem that e-commerce was only 1% of sales. And take a look where we are today at 30% and varying by category. But the metric we like to take a look at, especially as all of us are looking at ways to drive incremental growth, is actually e-commerce's share of OmniGrowth. And as we take a look at e-commerce share of OmniGrowth, this tells the story of why we must embrace omnichannel capabilities and actually bring e-commerce into the fold and be designing for both bricks and mortar and e-commerce at the same time. We've got a number of categories that are mostly general merchandise, that actually over 100% of the growth is coming from e-commerce, right? Store is declining, e-commerce is the only source of growth across the board and driving growth in the category. A lot of the non-edible CPG categories in healthcare, other consumables, pet, mass beauty, right? 60 to almost 90% of the growth coming from e-commerce. And so if we're not there and if we're not leveraging that as a competitive differentiator to meet our consumers where they are, we're not going to be able to meet our growth ambitions. And even down to a lot of the food and beverage categories, nearly a quarter of the growth is coming for e-commerce. And if we want to continue to drive the pace of growth and your growth objectives for 2024 and beyond, we've got to continue to embrace and design across the board. Now, you may be wondering where a couple of these things are missing. So there are a couple of categories that actually aren't growing across the board. But as you take a look, we've got both those that the category is declining, but e-commerce is growing. So really all of the growth is still coming from e-commerce in those categories. And then some where both in-store and online are declining across the board. So another way to really judge how we're doing and the imperative for driving omnichannel. I think the other thing that's changed this year in 2024 that we've been hearing from our clients and especially from many of our retailers demanding of their category leaders, stop bringing me POS and calling it omni-analysis because e-commerce is included. That's just not good enough anymore. And it covers up some of the challenges when we're talking about it's included versus we're breaking apart and decomposing growth in order to maximize pockets of growth and lean into them and activate against them. And so as we step up and meet our ambitions of being omnichannel leaders and category leaders, we've got to embrace and step up our omni capabilities. So the opportunity we're all faced with is needing OmniGrowth strategies for incremental growth. And the core foundation that we put together last year to help folks manage that across the board is moving beyond just sales shares and profit and what's happened and continuing to look in the rear view mirror. And especially with e-commerce, a lot of folks that spend almost an entire month trying to cobble together some of their data from various data sources leveraging Circana to help put that together into a holistic picture, but more importantly, leaning in more to the consumer dynamics and understanding the why behind the buy for OmniGrowth strategies and some of the leading metrics as we think about the only ways really to grow ever have been around driving household penetration, basket building, and frequency. And we've got to get back in an omni-channel space to make sure that we've moved beyond the blind basics of learning the digital shelf levers, but leveraging the how, both in-store and online, across the board, and leveraging that connected data set to tell affluent stories. That's what we're going to put together for you today as we take a look at the omni-channel playbook and give you a holistic approach to managing that within your category across the board. So one of the things that we thought that we would do is last year in one of the chapters where we did a deep dive into the category penetration, we asked our audience this question, and because it resonated so much with our clients afterwards, we thought it was worth repeating the same poll to see if we've made any progress as an industry in moving towards omni-channel fluency and fluency in many of the digital levers to help drive our business and in our conversations with retailers. So if you take a couple minutes to click on the boxes here, you're allowed to click more than one. Well, we'll take a look and see where we are and if we've moved the needle at all as an industry. So I'll give folks about 30 more seconds before we do the big reveal. And as a reminder, please click on at least one box and multiple boxes if that applies to you and your company. Okay, a few more still ticking up. I'll give you 5 more seconds. All right, let's see the results. So what do you think, Oscar? I think, at least as I look at the top, we've got about the same percentage of folks that still think that they're still just focusing on the store because it's the majority of volume. A lot of folks still struggling with education across the board and telling a good e-commerce story, but that being in parallel. Although it looks like at the bottom, a few more folks have started building some digital shelf KPIs and starting to build growth plans. So exciting to see some of that progress. Let's dig in to give you a framework and a toolkit to help elevate that in your approach.
Yeah, so, the way we were actually thinking about putting this story, because, as you all know, telling a complex story is always difficult, and it's like, what order should we tell it? So this is kind of our shot in terms of being able really to focus on it. So we always start with diagnosing specific category trends, and I'm always a big proponent of actually looking beyond just your own category, look at adjacent category, just kind of understanding, is the category healthy or not? We then do want to focus on specific consumer dynamics. The entire series has been built around really focusing on new buyers, brand penetration, category penetration, frequency, right? Basket building, but really kind of understanding the dynamics and how that dynamics is changing is absolutely critical. We then looking at just Omni analytics, really looking at the overall story. How do we actually take a lot of those different data sets and being able to actually organize them in a way where it's actually very clear in terms of what our go-to-market strategy should look like. Then, of course, we got to look from a retailer role and kind of understand, who do we want to win, where do we have the biggest opportunities? And then how do we actually take our strategy and being able to activate it? So we're going to start with first, which is probably my favorite because I'm a gigantic data nerd, and really looking at diagnosing some of the category trends and really understanding what's the difference between bricks and clicks, as well as, what's going on within the subcategories. And if you actually look at just overall, specifically, the OmniGrowth category is about 9.7% when it comes into like dollar sales, specifically for carbonated beverages, minus 1.2% when it comes into units. And then we actually see that e-commerce is actually growing about 16.6%, and then in store is growing 9.2%. But as you can tell, the category is very much weighted towards in store. But you can actually see some of those dynamics. Really, what's really important is to also look at the subcategories, because not all of them are the same. Because what does matter is there's a lot of fluctuation within this specific category of carbonated beverages, where you actually see low calorie versus regular growing at a different rate. As well as, for different brands, when it comes into that, because, of course, we have a lot of the new brands coming up, like Poppy and Olipop, which, we're going to talk about this later. So I think from that perspective, really kind of understanding the nuances in terms of those subcategories, kind of understanding what, especially with the newer generation coming in and, what's their preference. We, for example, know that diet is no longer a factor, but the low sugar is, because, especially the younger generation wants to actually have carbonated beverages that contain no sugar, and they're not necessarily focusing on the diet. So the quality of ingredients do matter. So it's all of this is very important, as well as, kind of understanding also the flavor profile. But really, what I always like to look at, and you actually see this, is like when we actually look at the e-commerce share of Omni sales, carbonated beverages is actually falling behind where the overall beverages category is. So carbonated beverages is 6.4% in terms of e-commerce share of Omni sales. Beverages is 10%. Total CPG is 15.6%, right? So the category is actually pretty still kind of prime for additional growth. And of course, within overall categories, we do have categories like pet supplements, where their penetration is about 98%, right? So from that perspective, it's definitely good to really understand is where it all sits together. But then it also gets interesting when we actually overlay the actual players and from a category perspective. So we see some like Coca-Cola, which are actually trailing carbonated beverages category, right? Coca-Cola right now at 5.4%. But then we have some of more established players like PepsiCo and Keurig Dr. Pepper that are over-indexing that growth. PepsiCo 6.5, Keurig 6.8. And now, of course, there's a story of private label, which is actually very high based on what we've seen at 14.9%. And then Poppy, which is one of the brands that is kind of up-and-coming brand, where their e-commerce penetration, not surprisingly, is 27.2%. But then we also, the way we like to look at it is when you actually look at e-commerce share of OmniGrowth, that story changes, right? So, and we actually see within the carbonated beverages, when it comes into growth, the numbers are actually ticking up, both for the carbonated beverages, because now the e-commerce share of OmniGrowth is 10.4%, beverages 18.6%. But you can actually see that what's staggering, that total CPG is actually 40%, right? So we definitely see that e-commerce is kind of funneling that growth. And then plant-based milk is basically all of the growth. And the reason why this number is so high, because, there's a lot of decline when it comes into stores. So that's why you actually see that share to be actually much larger. And then from a player perspective, it's actually very similar story. The only outlier is that private label is actually growing mostly in the store, no surprisingly, just because of, it's much easier for the retailers to position it within the store. So we see it kind of under indexing the growth versus the overall growth. And then, everything else is actually following actually fairly similar pattern. And maybe the only call out is Coca-Cola, which Coca-Cola has such a big business in the store that their e-commerce, kind of share of OmniGrowth is actually a little bit under indexing. But what I do like about this way of actually looking at it is because, everything is relative, and it's very easy to kind of end up in a situation is where you focus really on, your competitors, and then you have like category blinders without actually looking holistically at the whole picture and what that look like. And then the other thing is what we also, kind of see it is just because of what I was talking about on the previous slide, that there is a massive difference between zero sugar and then diet. Because, for example, Coca-Cola is leaning more onto zero sugar. So, those differences, you can actually start seeing it. But then you can actually see when it comes into the actual growth that the numbers are actually pretty staggering because, they could basically be doubling the actual growth. So from regular for this CPGA jumps up from 3.4% growth to 7.9%. And even on the negative on regular for another CPG could be 11.15% versus 3.3% negative growth. So there could be massive differences when it comes into subcategories. So the understanding how the consumer preference is changing, it's absolutely critical in terms of that.
So as we take a look at some of the innovators at Circana, we publish every year a new product pace setters report that highlights some of the new products coming to market, some aspects about it. And as Oscar mentioned, the importance of looking at the bigger picture. I think these are some great examples in the beverages category of some brands that have reframed category definitions, and a lot of them via social media as a way to break through and connect, especially with unmet needs in the marketplace, and delivering a product that really connects with how consumers are reframing their healthy lifestyles. Certainly with athletic brewing and beer, for beer lovers that love a healthy lifestyle, but not necessarily the impacts of alcohol and lower calorie for exercise and that healthy lifestyle or choices, especially for some of the younger millennials changing attitudes towards alcohol consumption. And then within the carbonated beverage category that we chose for this analysis, Poppi and Olipop. So Oscar can tell you a million stories about Olipop. He probably has one underneath at his desk right now. Of course, he does. I know I've been hearing a lot about Poppi from my 3 kids that are range from 10 to 16 that have insisted. And I think what's amazing too about this is in a category that is really dominated, and growth is dominated by inflation and prices, and folks pulling back on units because of they're looking for value and trading into private label. In some cases, both Olipop and Poppi are coming in at rate $2.50 a can versus under $1, and folks are paying it. Oscar, I know you've got at least something to add on Olipop as a big fan. I think you personally may have accounted for at least a couple points of share growth.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I can't account for all of the Olipop growth, but it's interesting the growth of it, right? Just because of I was a massive Diet Coke consumer about 10, 15 years ago. Then because of the sugar issues as well as the preservative, I kind of withdrew from the category, and then Olipop made me come back to the category just because of it offer a little bit better health benefits, especially, I run a lot, swim a lot, I try to stay on the top of protein, and guess what, what really it's hard is to actually take the right amount of fiber and the right amount of probiotics because it's very easy to focus on, the protein side. So I think, from that perspective, it's just Olipop offer that functional benefit to me. It's like, hey, I can help you with fiber. I can help you a little bit with the probiotics. And that can actually got me back into it. And I think some of it is also, it's the way Olipop and Poppi approach the influencers. If you actually look at their TikTok strategy, where they're actually building very innovative content, very fun content, and kind of making a very well-established category with very well-established players like, Coca-Cola, Keurig, and then PepsiCo, and try to make it a little bit more accessible to people that most likely would never come back to it just because of some of the preferences in terms of their life choices.
Yep, and if you missed the overall report and curious about some of the other brands, we've got a hyperlink there in the deck that you can download and access after the webinar.
Yeah, so from a perspective of just the category dynamics, just remember category carbonated beverages are actually underdeveloped when it comes into e-commerce versus grocery and even beverages. I think it's always really important to understand the dynamics between the subcategories, just because of we see a lot of those shifts in terms of the preferences across all categories, but specifically for beverages, just because of it's almost like a transition to the entire category. And then the one that it's really kind of the closest to my heart, because that comes up with some of the conversation that we have with our clients, is that where you don't want to find yourself is just to have that compounding effects of losses where you are like behind your competitors, despite that you might be basically representing a very well established brands, very loved brand, as well as categories, right? So kind of understanding broader picture with data partners like Circana, I honestly think it's the way to do it, is just because of any number is relative, and that relativity is absolutely important because that can also uncover what are some of the opportunities for the category kind of going forward to help you build this strategy.
So thanks, Oscar. And after we've diagnosed some of the trends in the category, I think the most important step that surprisingly many brands are missing, they often talk a good game about the consumer, but what we've been finding and hearing and recognizing across the board as we talk to clients is that they're leaving the omni consumer out of the picture. And in a world where growth is dependent on driving relevance and staying connected with the consumer, and that's as dynamic as ever, we've got to get into then the consumer dynamics and understand what's driving that. We've got a number of interesting things then as we decompose what's happening here and how shoppers are buying and the way that they're engaging in the category.
Yeah, so a few things that we are seeing is we definitely see that 10% dollar sales growth. Previously we seen 9.6, but this is just round up to 10%. We see definitely the household penetration in terms of the category. It's still ticking up, but as you can see later, this is a very well-established category. I think the omni category is like number 3 in terms of new buyers. We also see, some of the upticks when it comes into the overall spend, which some of it is accounted to inflation, as well as definitely kind of like the core metrics of frequency, because for a lot of the brands, which you're going to see that later on, kind of mastering the frequency, mastering the basket building techniques is absolutely critical to ensure the growth. But we definitely see the number of units dropping, and some of it is because people are just making purchases that are smaller but more frequent, as well as we definitely see, like, for example, the Olipop situation is where the price per can might be much higher. So versus, like, for example, drinking 3 Diet Coke, you might just drink 1 Olipop and kind of spread it this a little bit more. So which also has influence on the entire category when it comes into that. But then the other thing is what I also, kind of Anne and I are always looking at it is how many buyers are actually omni buyers, right? Where they are basically buying at the store and they are buying, at the store and online. And for carbonated beverages is 23%. And, we definitely see other categories, which is, like beverages is over 50% buyers omni, 66% for edible, and 85% overall. So we definitely see the carbonated beverage category is still very kind of sided either store or either online, and we just don't see those omni buyers as frequent, which is kind of an interesting opportunity kind of to go forward.
As we take a look at those 50% of beverage buyers that are 50% omnichannel buyers and look beyond the borders of just carbonated beverages to where some of those occasions are going and stealing some of the buyers from the carbonated beverage category. We take a look, a lot of the newer categories driving new buyer growth are those that are reacting quickly to shifting consumer preferences. And 3 key things that we see across the board is, especially when it comes to hydration, a lot more DIY forms across the board. So as you think about, Gatorade is probably one of the first things that comes to mind for sports drink mixes for any for folks, but across the board to Liquid IV, Prime not only is bottled, but also now sells some of the individual pouches, Celsius and others are taking away some of the sticker shock of bottling that and adding it to water and letting folks do it by themselves as a way to manage value in the category. The other trend towards healthy drinks, we're also seeing a lot of clear beverages, including tonic water and club soda, as well as some of the canned juices and drink milks. So these are some of the other ways that consumers are growing and that we've got to be able to adapt. So as we take a look at where the CSD categories falls on a ranking of the top growth from new buyers across the beverages category, at least the low calorie soft drinks comes in at 14, with regular carbonated beverages all the way down near the bottom of the list.